Iraq War, 8 great things that changed the world for the better. A Vietnam's Christmas tribute. I had written this last year as a tribute for the vets, as a Christmas gift to them. This is event 5 of 8. Asia saved, Jihad diverted, and Brotherhood of man found. Jihad's call for global revolution was in play long before the Iraq War. America happened along just as their campaign was finally gaining critical mass. The Empire of Islam was gearing up for its next phase, the conquest of Asia. No matter the conspiracy of choice, this part of the Osama bin Laden story is quite true. In retrospect, it looks like he may have well succeeded, if not for, guess who? Critics of the Gulf War point to Al-Qaeda. They tell us how extremists headed for Iraq after the fall of Saddam Hussein. They blame America for it, and how right they are. And yet they don't mention from where these terrorists came. They are blind how this migration saved India, China, and Russia from the impending war of jihad. It likely saved much of North Africa too. America's timing has that familiar ring of irony. Some call it fate, the rise of one power surprised by a sudden opposing force of equal or greater power, a balance of wills in step to a dance of destiny's drumbeat of. And so radical Islam was stopped cold in their tracks by our American vets. All told, Asia stands the winner. A simple measure may be found in America's own price tag of war, $5 trillion. Many say it was much more. This blood and treasury offers some idea to the price Russia, China, and India would have been left to pay today. Jihadists were striking at them in their formative tender years as developing nations. This conflict would have derailed much of the promise they hold today as the coming superpowers of this century. Our veterans served as the guardian warrior to this prosperity of today, at least for Asia. It was Americans who fought in place of these Asian fronts of Jihad's war. Our soldiers stood to fight this global threat. They did so against the blitz rarely seen since the ravages of World War II. The chorus of thanks for our soldiers was the growing judgment of an ungrateful nation and a world full of condemnation. No matter their success in battle or how valiantly they fought, no matter the tyrants conquered or the elections voted in the heart of Islam, it was always third and fourth place to a simple appreciation for a job well done by our vets. And yet, all the grandstanding by experts the world over missed but a single, simple question. What would have become of Asia without America's intervention? Go review the skirmishes from the 1990s. They were breaking out across Russia, China, India, and North Africa. Chechnya, but a small enclave, took Russia 15 years to crush. And yet the bulk of those terrorists were off fighting in Iraq. The same again with Chad, Ethiopia, and Sudan. Of course, India lived this growing terrorism throughout their country. Even China had its own growing small pockets beginning to, quote, demonstrate in spite of the government's escalating swift and harsh reprisals. Jihad was picking up speed and intensity throughout Asia and North Africa. Worse still, these countries began responding in kind as much to Islam as to one another. It's something I tracked as an old Hindu boy from my school days in India, the pattern all the more obvious in retrospect. The Great War of Jihad would have militarized much of Asia. The charms of these beautiful people and the cultures of their ancients left hijacked into a war zone of conflict, fear, and hate. The developed nations they became all but lost to endless battles of Islam, if not between each other too. The tattered economies of feuding nations would be their fate today. It would look much like the wars of the Middle East now, horrific, endless, all-consuming, and very messy, even by the standards of war. There would be small islands of prosperity to an ocean of anguish. Relationships between these countries would be of suspicion and isolation as we beget in climates of war and hostility. In short, it was a war someone was going to have to fight against the jihadis. There would be the place of bombs, death, and destruction. It was supposed to be Asia. Instead, America fought it in their stead. India, China, and Russia spared by our young American soldiers. Iraq now the stand-in to its devastation. For better or for worse, President George Bush took the fight to the enemy, and so Asia was spared and prospered because of it. The idea started with my own Guru Maharaj Srila Prabhupada. He talked of India, Pakistan wars, the coming Armageddon of our time. He said most countries would join sides. 80% of the world's people left to perish in that great war. Prabhupada's warning left me to view the Iraq War as a small token to this terrible fate, or at least a diversion from it. I gather millions from India would likely agree, probably millions more from Russia and China as well. President Clinton confirmed as much. He told of his days talking India and Pakistan from imminent war. It was a dialect in the threats of nuclear holocaust, the bluster of Russia and China ever rattling in the background, just waiting to intervene, and all the makings of a world war between India and China, between India and Pakistan. This may be the greatest testament to President Clinton's charm. He diffused the immediate threat of nuclear confrontation between India and Pakistan, and so saving billions from misadventure and terrible ruin. However, by the early 2000s, all these points of confrontation across the region magically dissipated. The fog of war lifted like morning dew in the early rays of a rising peace. Poof, gone just like that. How? Well, those jihadist terrorists had now found their way to America's battlefront for Iraq. Our American soldiers volunteered to stand as the new target for all the hordes of jihadi fundamentalists previously geared towards Asia. It's at this juncture of Asia's newfound peace that we find the most extraordinary of normal to have ever happened. As the threat of terrorist and war slowed, India broke from the tried and true opiate of nationalism, military confrontation. They were swept away by the explosive opportunities of the emerging market economy. The global economy of the day was little more than selling to American markets. It's behind this rush for new business that we find the untold story of our American veterans. It starts with India's hundreds of millions that became billions in new business. Their interest for war fell in step with each billion made, more so of China. They also stepped out from military posture and took to the billions waiting in American exports. Put simply, the great Asian miracle was fueled by all their exports to America. This drowned out the seduction of war as much from the baiting war of Islam as between nations, China, Pakistan, India, Russia, etc. The point is a simple one. Asia's safe house of prosperity was directly taken in the cover of peace by the war in Iraq. That was all made possible by the sacrifice and fight of our American veterans. The battles of Iraq stood in Asia's place, America's intervention saving whole nations and the lives of multi-billions. The price was paid in blood by our American veterans. The Iraq wars could be summed up as America playing defense so the rest of the world could play house and build a modern nation of their very own. My dear vets, your fight for freedom was truly for the greater good of all the world. Behold of what has become of this today. These countries now stand as leaders in this global village, their success giving legitimacy to the whole of the global economy. No longer is the global economy just another front of Western imperialism. It has now become Asia's story of prosperity and testament of nearly 4 billion people. But this is only the beginning. Take special note, for here we find one giant leap for mankind. Behind this flurry of commerce lay milestones of new bonds between nations of old divide. Countries stepping past rivalries of yore for partnerships of innovation and alliance of genuine camaraderie. Humanity avoiding the death and destruction of warfare's curse as they reach for the goods and services of today's market fair gifts. This brand of prosperity offers treasures far beyond those of war. Each transaction another disdain of war. They harden around the growing channels for business as another stepping stone in the path to peace. Renewed confidence in the best of ourselves, chipping away at those inbred and stubborn fears to the very worst of others. The brotherhood of man, the marvelous new normal of this coming generation of today's millennial youths. It has been a stunning couple decades indeed for the world as a whole. My dear veterans, it is in this new world your fight has given for all mankind to share. A new narrative as a people of common cause that is also very different than anything of our forefathers in history's past. As such, my dear veterans, please know that you hold some claim to Asia's reign of peace and prosperity. It now stands as a couple decades long. You brought these people time to prosper, to find a better way as nations, and discover this brotherhood of man between people of every creed, no matter the religion, origin, or color. This was bred of American veterans as we honor you as our American hero this weekend, Memorial Day. My dear veterans, here is history's own Medal of Honor for your gifts of sacrifice. It goes to your dedication for duty, country, and the cause of freedom. Today I ask the world to honor this side of your story. It's the living legacy of the world's very best, as much in chivalry's most glorious as it is the defining ideal of America's commitment to liberty. Now go forth and answer the critics of this war of Iraq. Radical Islam was diverted from the innocence of Asia's billions to target the excellence of the American warrior. India, China, and Russia saved from the ravages of war, of Islam, Africa too. You preempted the Hitler of our times, but not with all the world's armies fighting by your side in equal measure as we had in World War II, but often alone with little more than a fellow brother in arms and your own convictions. I salute thee on behalf of Asia's 3 billion people, entire regions now covered by real prosperity, the ways of market economics standing in place of old war conflicts under this dome of peace made possible of your blood and valor. Your honor is found in their triumph, and yet this is only the beginning debt owed to you. We owe it as a nation, and the world owes it by all those calling themselves a citizen of this new world. Happy Memorial Day. Aloha.